president has delivered his speech, his message, and the question is, have you been inspired? Do you have a better idea of the state of the nation as a result of what he had to say? And as he threw forward to his plans going forward, how inspired are you that things will work out? Well, I've got a couple of guests in the studio, and hopefully we'll be talking to more to give us a sense of their thoughts about what the president said and what the state of our nation really is. And I'm glad to be joined in studio by the Director of Research at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, Professor Susan Booysen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
And also regular commentator, communication strategist at the Political Commentator Makhosini Mgitywa. Thanks very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so the president has spoken, and I think it was one of the longest SONAs that has been delivered in quite a while. Is it because he had a lot to say, or what do you think it was?
Yes, he certainly had a lot to say. Yes, he ticked all the boxes, all the necessary critical issues that had to be touched on were touched on. Maybe emphasis on touch on, as always, hardly ever dealt with in detail and in depth, but he touched on those issues, and a tactic in this speech was to embroider on the problems, on the issues, and what needs to be corrected, what the problems are, obstacles are, and then I think it's a fraction, probably 5 or 10% maximum of the content of this very long speech was actually to do with solutions. And when we came to the solutions again, there's just a tiny fraction that have very specific and short-term timelines to it. On many other critical issues, there was like plans are being developed, a conference is being held. And so next year, this time, we could probably look forward to, I don't think look forward to, but we'll have the task of assessing what kind of progress there was made in that. So this is overall orientation in it. I think there could have been much more emphasis on specific solutions, specific answers, but perhaps this is a sign of the time that the president at this stage, leading the kind of party that is leading, in charge of a government of which so many institutions have been hollowed out, and of which his own authority over those institutions is always not clear. No, it's not always clear. And it is perhaps in this context that he is not in a position to give the exact tasks, solutions to the tasks at hand. And it's very interesting, much of the emphasis that came through across different issues was also opening the road for business, removing red tape, really an acknowledgement that state cannot do this on its own, and this type of the new catchword in this phrase, new consensus, in which nobody has to be left behind. That new consensus has to be fostered in order to do things together, and that is a common refrain in ANC and government rhetoric.
Makhosini, I think maybe where I should have started is because we say State of the Nation address, and sometimes we don't really think about what the speech is supposed to do, and then we measure it based on that. What is it supposed to do? What is it supposed to do for the public?
Look, a State of the Nation address gives you a sense of where we are as a country. You're hearing it from the executive, because we must remember, and I think it's important for us to remind ourselves, that the State of the Nation address is not the presidential address in which the president is speaking out of his own heart and saying what needs to happen. It starts with the Lekgotla in the ANC, Cabinet Lekgotla. You get to a point where all department and all ministries are making a contribution to the speech. So when the president reads that speech, he's reading a promise that ministers are making to him, and ministers making those promises based on what the DGs and other officials are making to them, or at least are saying that this is possible. So my reading of the speech, and unfortunately, we had a lot of ministers who had to come and defend the president's speech because they make the contribution to that speech. So if it hadn't been for that, perhaps I could have been even more generous to the president, like Susan has said, that it ticked all the boxes. a speech like this, when you have record unemployment, you have, the majority of young people, especially black people in this country, are unemployed and they are looking for work. Right? There are so many problems. I mean, I don't know if you've driven around to see the state of infrastructure, how roads have been damaged. I mean, there are potholes everywhere. There's a destruction of public infrastructure generally by organized criminal syndicates. There are so many things that we are dealing with as a nation that are negative, that are not positive. So the president is like somebody who comes to deliver a speech when the national team is 3-0 down, is being beaten, during halftime. He must come and say something that will encourage us, that will keep, that will have us cheer on our losing team. So I think insofar as from a communications point of view and the speech touching all the areas, I think he did very well. But for me, the important thing is not so much what the president said as it is what he didn't say. The elephant in the room is the ANC conference in December. And he has to be very, very careful about that. And I think I could get a sense of how he is trying to work around things. Because in this year, it's not advisable. He may very well do it, but it's not advisable to reshuffle cabinet and to fire ministers. So where you're not happy with performance, for instance, when you're talking about red tape, you're not happy with the performance of the ministers, instead of firing, hire somebody from the private sector, put him in your office so that he can do what the ministers are not doing, because you cannot fire them. So I'm saying, even when you look at the contribution, because all ministries make contributions to the speech, and when I looked at the minister who has raised her hand and actually is challenging him, I found that the speech was thin on matters of tourism. Now, it could very well be that the Minister of Tourism did not give him enough content for him, to reflect on in the State of the Nation address, or some of the things that the minister said did not make it into the speech. And again, that would talk to the contestations leading to the elective conference of the ANC in December. He didn't speak about that. He couldn't have spoken about that. But that is the elephant in the room.
Interesting opening thoughts. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll start to unpack various
forces. In some instances, I used to work at PRASA. The people that were caught vandalizing the infrastructure, the majority of them, 9 out of 10 times, they were not South Africans. They were foreigners, and there was a clear route of the infrastructure that's harvested. Where it goes into a neighboring country, and it goes to Asia. So I'm saying I did note that he spoke about increasing capacity within the police, but I think that the protection of public infrastructure is not something that should be left to state-owned entities, because they have their core business, which is not security. If you take PRASA, for instance, their core business is passenger rail. If you take ESCOM, it's electricity generation and supply. Transnet, it is moving cargo. It is not to guard these thousands and thousands of rail that is not protected, that is just out in the open, that anybody can go and do whatever they want to do. I think, in my view, there could have been a justification of, in some instances, using special forces, either from, the army or from police, to guard the critical infrastructure. Because what is happening now, and as somebody pointed out, that it's like we take 1 step forward and 3 steps backwards. But also on the issue of security, by the way, just my own view, if I were to speculate, I don't think that the National Commissioner will last until the end of the year. That's just my reading of the situation, taking from what the minister said, the Minister of Police. In my view, he insinuated that the National Commissioner is partisan on the factional issues of the ANC. And I think I do, again, repeat that the elephant in the room in this State of the Nation address, what was not spoken about, but what is critical and what will decide whether the state performs the way it should or it doesn't, it is the elective conference of the ANC towards the end of the year. everybody is concerned about it. The president himself is concerned about it, because if he's not re-elected, then he can forget about being president of the republic. He has to be re-elected president of the ANC for him to continue to be president of the republic. And I think that the State of the Nation address that will give you a clearer sense is one that will be delivered next year, not necessarily this one.
After he gets a mandate.
Absolutely.
If that's
or
what
somebody
happens.
else gets
okay.
it. Yeah.
He spoke about a change in leadership that is coming. And Antoni Fanikak says, perhaps we should put that question to you. Do you get any sense about what he meant? I think Makhosini's already sort of thought about the National Commissioner might be one of those. But are there other faces, do you think, that he might be brave enough to change before the elective conference?
Mm-hmm. It is indeed a double-edged sword to make those changes. It's fine to fill vacancies and to play musical chairs to move people around. And our presidents in the last decades, 2 decades really, have been experts at not alienating people, just pushing them into a different portfolio for a while and maybe even rehabilitate them into a previous portfolio. We've seen that, like with the previous Minister of State Security, David Mahlobo, moved around. But people tend to stay there. Even Lindiwe Sisulu, she has been moved around through multiple portfolios, but she stays in cabinet in order to keep her close. She's just an example of how people are being kept close. And I was very interested, Ramaphosa in his speech had mentioned there could be a plan in a few months' time on how to deal with all the reports and the findings of the reports on corruption and capture. But it is exactly an almost impossible year for him to make those changes, because indeed, the electoral conference is coming up. Branches, regions, provinces are making their marks right in these 3 months currently and the next 2 months. And they have to be, the big leaders have to be careful. Not that they have to be, but they want to be for their own security and for their own nominations in pulling that through. And alienating opponents or making potential further opponents, that spells bad news for any elective conference. So it is a very delicate game that these politicians play. And yes, it is a shame in many respects that the national politics of a country has to depend to such an extreme extent as it does. Maybe the world over, it's not an uncommon phenomenon, but in South Africa it is so pertinent how it depends on what is going on in the governing party and how the fate of the governing party is so interwoven with national politics. And that, of course, is such an important point for the President Ramaphosa and his ANC, because the fusion of ANC power with state power is one of the benchmarks of its own generalized power over society. And we see, and the President also acknowledged it in his speech, that so many of the institutions are hollowed out, actually mean nothing and can do nothing. It's fine to say so many more police people are going to be recruited or deployed, but then once they start operating in institutional context, they do not have the plans, they do not have the information, they do not have the equipment, and then what to do. So it's a comprehensive project to rebuild those state institutions that shouldn't have been left to fall into this kind of decay in the first place. I'm not quite sure who is accepting responsibility for that one. But there's so much rebuilding that has to take place. And in this year where ANC power is an important bargaining chip in the ANC's internal electoral stakes, where the state power, there is much decay that has been happening there, and therefore less bargaining tools for the ANC in building their own campaigns and projects.
All right, so a lot to do in terms of rebuilding, and I guess what he wants is to be given an opportunity to do that rebuilding. But he also spoke about many other things which we'll unpack after this. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, many other things that he spoke about on the SONA this evening, social issues, grants and unemployment, business, so many other things that we'll start to unpack right here. So stay with us.